Hello, my name's David Runciman, and this is Past, Present, Future. We have come to the penultimate episode in our series about the great political films. This is another film about war. This is another film about political violence. I realise there have been a lot of those, but unlike almost all the others I've talked about, this one was directed by a woman, Kathryn Bigelow, and its central character is a woman, played by Jessica Chastain. This is the film of the story of the hunt for Osama Bin Laden, 0 Dark 30. The German political philosopher Carl Schmitt, who wrote primarily in the 1920s, had as one of his mantras that there is no such thing as office politics. Clearly, the term office politics had already come into vogue more than 100 years ago to describe the infighting, the petty battles over power and promotion and who gets to be the boss that takes place in every workplace everywhere in the world. We all know what we mean when we talk about office politics. I think we probably, all of us, think we've experienced office politics. But Schmitt thought it was a category mistake. You shouldn't call it politics. He was absolutely adamant that the word politics should be reserved for a very particular kind of activity that can only take place at the level of the nation state and is about defending the homeland, defending the way of life of the people who inhabit a nation. It's about borders. It's about deciding, in the language that he used, between friends and enemies. He thought politics was simply about the friend-enemy distinction. Everything else, he said, was a kind of trivialization, a bastardization of the category of politics, office politics in particular. You don't make those kind of existential decisions about who gets to belong in your community inside your workplace. That happens at the national level, Schmitt said. Schmitt is an influential philosopher, but he is a notorious philosopher, in part because after he wrote some of this stuff in the early 1930s, from 1933 until 1936, he became a Nazi. And that is a pretty good illustration of some of the things that can go wrong with his philosophy, with the idea that politics is all about deciding who the enemy is. And as he put it, deciding in the end whom you need to kill. But Schmitt was also, on another level, wrong about some of the things that he said, including he was wrong about the fact that there is no such thing as office politics, because even on his own terms, even if you think that politics should be reserved for those big existential decisions about who lives and who dies when it comes to the war to defend the homeland, when it comes to the defense of the border, even if you believe that, some of that stuff happens in offices. It doesn't all happen on some kind of glorified Olympian stage where people make these life or death decisions. Every decision of every kind, however significant, has a kind of bureaucratic form. It happens in places where people work, where they also care about petty politicking, who's up, who's down, where they worry about promotion, where they want to know who gets to sit next to the boss, where they want to know who gets the desk with the view of the park, and who gets to have their lunch break earlier. That even happens in existential politics. Schmitt became very fashionable as a thinker after 9/11. So he was invoked by quite a lot of people who wanted to elevate politics, particularly in the United States, but not just there, in the UK as well, wanted to elevate politics to this existential friend-enemy version of decision-making. The attacks of 9/11 persuaded some people that politics had been distilled to its essence in their aftermath. The question of who is the enemy and what we are willing to do, including what violence we are willing to countenance, to defend a way of life, a way of being, call it democracy, call it America, call it the West, call it whatever you like, against its enemies. That was the thinking behind the war on terror. And Schmitt got wheeled out time and again after 2001 to justify various things, including justifications of Guantanamo Bay, of enhanced interrogation techniques, as they were known, better known as torture, and so on. But something else that became fashionable after 9/11, particularly in filmic or televisual representations of the politics of 9/11, was the idea that a lot of it boiled down to office politics. And I'm thinking of two things in particular, one TV series and one film. The TV series is the one based on Lawrence Wright's book called The Looming Tower, about the failures, the intelligence failures behind 9/11. Why were the United States intelligence agencies so bad at making use of all the information that they had about the people who would, on September the 11th, 2001, reveal themselves to be the enemies of the state? These people were known. Some of them had been tracked. There were files on most of them, and yet it came as a surprise. That's the theme of The Looming Tower, and a large part of its explanation in the book and then in the TV series, starring Jeff Daniels, is it was turf warfare inside the intelligence agencies, particularly between the CIA and the FBI. A lot of what is described is what people would call office politics, not existential politics, but fights over protecting your little bit of the US bureaucracy. People worried about promotion, people worried about accountability chains within their little patch of the political ecosphere, and jealousy and bitterness and holding on to information because you don't want the other side to get it. The other side here not being Al-Qaeda, not being the terrorists, the other side being the CIA if you're FBI, the FBI if you're CIA. And in The Looming Tower, the story only makes sense if you believe that existential questions devolve to the level of office politics. And that is also a theme of Zero Dark 30. The Looming Tower is about what led up to 9/11. Zero Dark 30 starts not with visual footage, but with audio, with just recordings of what happened on that day, including some harrowing recordings of people trapped in the Twin Towers. And it tells the story of what followed from the attacks themselves, focused on the question of how the United States sought to track down the man who was responsible, Osama Bin Laden. This is not a story about turf warfare between the CIA and the FBI. The FBI don't really feature in Zero Dark 30. This is all internal to the CIA, a large bureaucracy, a wing of the US government with offices and with promotion structures and career reviews and all the rest. And it tells a story that only really makes sense if there is office politics going alongside the big existential questions. And part of what I think makes this such a compelling film, a brilliant film, even though it's deeply controversial, and I'll come on to that, is the way it plays simultaneously with, let's call them the Schmittian questions, the existential questions. It feels like quite a Schmittian film. And its understanding of how so much of this is filtered through a much, much more familiar bureaucratic level of contest, what we would call office politics. There are lots of scenes where these two things are going on simultaneously. So, for instance, there's a scene in this movie where a senior CIA official, played by the British actor Mark Strong, doing a pretty good American accent, gathers together the team that have been responsible for tracking down not just Osama bin Laden, but senior Al-Qaeda operatives. And he is furious with them. He gets them in a room, maybe about 20 people, 25 people, round a conference table. It's a familiar kind of room. It's a familiar kind of conference table to anyone who's ever been in a meeting anywhere in the world. It's like grey and there's nothing happening. And people are looking a little awkward, a little bored, a little resentful at having to be there. They're a mixed bunch. And there's a man walking around the edge of the room having a kind of tantrum, Mark Strong, shouting about how they've let him down, how this team is not doing its job, and how they're expecting other people to bail them out. And he says, it's you have to do this. This is your job. You can't expect someone else. This is the team. We are the team, and this is our responsibility. We've been tasked with a role, and you aren't doing it well enough. And we are failing. We are not performing to the level that is expected of us by our bosses. And he's really angry. He's ranty. There's testosterone flying off him. But he's also performing. It's quite performative ranting. The people that he's shouting at, some of them look a little resentful, some of them look a little embarrassed, some of them look genuinely shamefaced. They know that what he says is true. They haven't been doing their jobs. And he ends with a flourish and he says, you've got to do the thing that I need you to do for me to do my job. He says, what you have to do is bring me people to kill. And he means to kill. So he's not just using corporate language. When he talks about a hit list, he means a hit list, people that he is then going to eliminate with drones, send someone to put a bullet in their head. So on one level, this is not like any office meeting anywhere in the world, because in every other kind of office meeting, even if people sometimes use that hyperbolic, militarized language, they are pretending. It's just performance. This is performative, but he means it. His job is to kill, and their job is to give him people that he can eliminate. So it is pure Schmittian politics. This is about defending the homeland by killing our enemies. And at the same time, it's completely recognizable to anyone who's been in a meeting where a group of 20 or 25 people are bulled at by their boss. It could almost be, not quite, but almost be David Brent in The Office. And these two things are going on simultaneously throughout this movie. The central character in the film is a woman. She's called Maya. She's not really, although almost all the events in the film are loosely or quite closely based on real events, this character Maya is not a real person in that the filmmakers made it clear that she was a composite of various people who worked in the CIA, some but maybe not all of them women, involved long-term in the hunt for Osama bin Laden. She's played by Jessica Chastain, and she is throughout the film involved in a series of fights with people that she works with or works for to persuade them that she is right and she is on the trail of bin Laden when they either get impatient or feel that they're following a dead end, that they're chasing a ghost, as some of them say, when they tire of it and think that there are better and more rewarding ways for them to spend their time. She is the dogged one. She is the one who carries on fighting, and so she is the hero of this film, and it is very much a celebration of this woman who is a composite, but in the film you identify with one person in particular, and you really do identify with her. She's the outsider as a woman in a very, very male world. This film came out in 2012, but Kathryn Bigelow had made her reputation over the previous 2 decades, including for pretty testosterone-driven films like Point Break, starring Keanu Reeves. She's a woman in a man's world, and she's making a film about a woman in a man's world. And I think part of the implication is that the Jessica Chastain character, Maya, her doggedness, her determination to keep going, her willingness to keep the faith in the investigation comes in part from being an outsider, from seeing things slightly differently from the men by whom she is surrounded. Not because she's not playing the office politics game, but because in that game she is consistently and persistently patronized. There are 1 or 2 scenes in which one man says to another, "Is it the girl?" meaning her. She's referred to once or twice as the girl. They don't know what to make of her. They look at her a little askance, a little suspiciously, and they are very suspicious of her instincts and her determination. They look at her and think, she's doing this to prove herself because she has more to prove than the men do, because she's an outsider in our world. So she's going the extra step in order to make her name, in order to show that she's good at the job. And so they're wary of her. But at the same time, you get the strong feeling that part of the reason she is going the extra step is not simply because she wants to show to them she can do their job, but she sees the ways in which they fail to do their job by being too comfortable in it. A lot of these men feel a bit like career bureaucrats, even though they are also killers. That's why the Mark Strong character is terrifying, because he wants people to kill. And he's also David Brent. And David Brent either is or isn't terrifying, depending on your taste, but you don't feel like he's a killer. So the Jessica Chastain character is playing with the idea of the different versions, I think, of office politics. And we see this play out in different ways, in the different kinds of contests and arguments and fights that she has, they are all existential. All of them turn on the real question. So it's not like it's office politics because they're not doing the other politics, the Schmittian politics. They're always doing the Schmittian politics. These people have as their job, essentially, to decide who dies. And some of them are actual killers. Not many, but some. But at the same time, while those arguments are going on, they are being filtered through other kinds of contests. One of the arguments that Maya, played by Jessica Chastain, has in the first part of the film is with another female CIA operative working in Pakistan. So a lot of this happens in the embassy in Karachi, which is where the CIA station also is. It's run by men, but you get the feeling that a lot of the people who are doing the work are women. The other character, who is based on a real person, called Jessica Carley, played by Jennifer Ailey. Jessica Carley was killed in a terrorist attack in Pakistan. Jennifer Ailey plays her as someone who is a kind of rival to Maya, and certainly to start with, we're meant to believe what's going on here is professional jealousy between two women in a man's world, each of them trying to assert themselves, not just against the men, but over the other. But it turns into friendship and mutual respect, and then genuine grief and heartbreak when one dies, in a mission that the other one easily could have been on. But at the same time, they are arguing about a fundamental difference of philosophy in their approach to counterterrorism. They have a different view of what works. The character played by Jennifer Ailey believes that in the end, the best way to turn terrorists, turn insiders from the organizations that they're trying to destroy is money. That human beings are bribable. If you've got enough money, $25 million is the sum that she believes has managed to turn an insider, a deep insider in Al-Qaeda, who will then be the person who leads them to Osama Bin Laden. And Maya doesn't agree. Maya believes that ideology trumps money, and that you might think 25 million would turn someone, but not if that person is an ideologue. And she believes that the people who are very close to the heart of Al-Qaeda are all ideologues and cannot be turned in that way. And the only way to find them, to capture them, or to kill them is to get inside their mindset, rather than raise the stakes until you find the sum that they can be bought for, because all human beings can be bought. This is a deep question about human psychology. This is the substance of what these people do at the highest level, money or ideology as the solvent to protect the United States of America. And it plays out in the contest between them, but it also plays out as a kind of professional rivalry, jealousy first, then friendship as they realize they can work together. The same thing happens in her relationship with her boss, Maya's relationship with her boss at the Karachi station. The man who runs it for the CIA is a serious professional guy. He's not out in the field. He wears a suit. We only see him inside the embassy. We only see him looking like any other kind of corporate guy. But we suspect he's also a killer. He's played by the man who played the coach in Friday Night Lights, if you want to picture him, the TV series. He also fights consistently with Maya about what they're doing. And again, the dispute is simultaneously office politics and existential politics. One of the things they fight about is, what is their job? He thinks their job is, he says it like this, to protect the homeland. She thinks their job is to find, capture, and if necessary, kill the people who attacked their homeland. He thinks it's about stopping more 9/11s happening. She thinks they still haven't caught the people who did 9/11, and that should be their priority. Again, the stakes could hardly be higher. That is the question. Is the job protecting against future disaster? Or is it punitive? Is it going after? Is it killing the enemy, the enemies of the state? But it's also a dispute about how they see the profession. And in part, it comes across clearly in the film. This is an anxiety on both of their parts about how they're going to be judged. This is almost about KPIs, key performance indicators. You can imagine performance reviews in which these questions come up. What do you think your job is? And there is a notorious difference between their two attitudes, not just in existential terms, but in KPI terms, because his approach has the weakness that when it works successfully, it's harder to notice it. If you stop future attacks, and this is also a theme of the looming tower and the dispute between the FBI and the CIA in that series are portrayed as the punitive ones. The FBI are portrayed as the preventative ones. And part of it is the thought that if you take the preventative route, you are foregoing the glory of the kill for the sake of something which may be more valuable in the long run, but is much, much harder to measure. It's much harder to measure the attacks you prevented because they didn't happen than it is to measure the people that you killed. And the argument between the two of them, between Maya and her boss, is a classic argument between an underling and a boss about how they are going to be assessed. And it's also a fundamental argument about national security. And this doubleness also plays out in the part of the film that is most notorious and most controversial. That is how this film represents the use of torture. Let's not call it enhanced interrogation, let's call it torture, because certainly as portrayed in this film, that's what it is. Waterboarding, hanging people up, depriving them of sleep, physically harming them, psychologically harming them. In one case, locking a man who is almost broken already in a tiny box. It is agony to watch. This is torture. Torture did feed into these Schmittian disputes post 9/11 about what it takes to take on your enemies. And it's there in this film. For some people, the film is a celebration of torture because it seems to imply that torture is part of the fight. Not necessarily the good fight, but it is part of the effective fight to defend the homeland. I'm not sure the film does say that, but one thing it clearly does do is show that torture itself folds into this kind of double world in which existential questions and bureaucratic questions are very, very hard to separate out. There is a great scene in the film in which the first person whom we meet on the CIA side, a torturer, a man running a black ops site in which he has detainees who are sort of middle-ranking, suspected Al-Qaeda operatives, and his job is to get information out of them by whatever means necessary. And we see him early on using the means. He waterboards them. He makes them feel like they're drowning. He beats them. He tells them that no good can come of this. He does all of the stuff that torturers do. He pretends to be their friend, and then he tells them that he's not their friend, and then he tortures them. He's the first CIA person that we meet, and then we discover that Maya, Jessica Chastain, has been in the room behind a mask, and then we see her go in the room without a mask. And we see, and the first thing we're meant to see about her is that she has the stomach for what she is watching. She is appalled, she is repulsed, but she doesn't leave the room. He says to her, because she's the girl, you don't have to watch this. She says, I'm going to watch this. She's in there with him. So they're doing this together. But after a while, we see them talking at the same site. It's clear they've been doing this for a long time with limited results. And he looks terrible. He looks broken by it. He's haunted, and he says to her, I have to tell you that I'm done here. I can't do this anymore. I've been doing it for a long time. I've seen a lot of guys suffer, and I can't do it anymore. And it feels like a kind of existential crisis. He looks like a man on the verge of a nervous breakdown, as you would expect, as you would understand if you join the CIA. Who knows what he signed up for, but you've become torturer in chief. It is presumably hard to sleep at night. But then when he goes on to explain why he's getting out, it turns out that's not the reason. The reason is that he is worried about bureaucratic accountability because it has become clear that the mood has changed in Washington. And there are questions that are going to be asked and have to be answered about what's been going on at these black ops sites. And he doesn't want to be in charge when the tide goes out. He's covering his back. And then he says, I've decided actually, and this is not what you'd expect from someone on the verge of a nervous breakdown, that I want to go back to Washington and I want to see how that game is played. Like, I played this game and I played it to the limit, but I'm worried now if I don't play the other game, which is basically the office politics game in Washington, inside the CIA, if I don't get into the rooms where it happens, that is the rooms where that kind of politics is done, I'm going to be exposed for what I did here. And the more you look at him, and then as you see him subsequently in the film, where he's working in Washington at the CIA headquarters in Langley and everywhere else, you see him working the rooms. He didn't have a nervous breakdown, and he has no compunction about what he did. And he says to one of his bosses back in the States, I did it and I'll defend it. He's playing the bureaucratic game, and she's sticking it out because she still thinks that her job is to find bin Laden. And she thinks he has chickened out, not because he doesn't have the stomach for torture, but because he doesn't have the stomach for the long bureaucratic haul, which is this kind of operation takes years. And most of it actually isn't inflicting pain on people in order to extract information. It's kind of looking through the files and doing the grudge work, doing the donkey work, doing the boring work, doing the stuff that can only happen at a desk. The controversy is partly because it is thought that Zero Dark 30 implies that torture was essential to discovering the man who led the Americans to bin Laden's compound, where eventually they were able to kill him. The man who led the Americans to his compound was a courier who, it turned out, lived in that compound and was used by bin Laden from that compound in Abbottabad in Pakistan to communicate with the outside world. So the whole hunt turns on finding the middleman, finding the courier, as he's known. And the film seems to imply that the first information about the courier and who he might be was extracted from detainees under torture. I'm not sure that the film does suggest that. I think it's pretty ambivalent about the usefulness of the information extracted under torture. I don't think it glorifies the torture. The early torture scene is very, very hard to watch. Though actually, I think ultimately not as harrowing as the most harrowing torture scene I've ever seen, which is the one at the beginning of the Battle of Algiers, because that scene doesn't show us the torture, but it shows us the effects of torture on someone who has been completely broken by it, who has been ruined by it as a human being. And actually, in Zero Dark 30, the main person whom we see being subjected to these terrible techniques is reasonably resilient, surprisingly so, given what's being done to him. We certainly don't see him break. And also, it's pretty clear that the information that's extracted from him and others like him isn't necessarily remotely reliable. And that the real work that goes in trying to identify the man who might be the courier comes from correlating a range of statements from a range of detainees, most of whom we see not under conditions of torture, but we see being interrogated across a desk by being asked questions and the answers written down. And it's by cross-referencing those answers that they seem to come up with an identity. So I'm not sure. I think it's ambiguous, and I think the critics of this film have a case if what they want is a condemnation of torture. This film is not condemnatory in that sense. But as an account of what led to the successful raid on bin Laden's compound, I'm not sure the early scenes are there to suggest this is what it depends on. The film shows a sequence, and it quite carefully delineates the elements of the sequence, each of which is a necessary, none of which is a sufficient condition for the final outcome, which is a dead Osama bin Laden. The stages that have to be gone to are first, interrogation. There's no question that the film implies that the first thing that had to happen was information had to be extracted by some means, but I don't think it thinks that the most effective means are under real duress. But there are 4 stages, of which interrogation, information extraction is only the first. And the different parts of the film are given titles. The next thing is human error has to be remedied. So the key early step, even though they've been at it for a while, the key early step in leading them to the identity of the courier is that, again, it's a woman. Again, it's a woman in a very, very lowly role. She's just a new person who's arrived and has been given the grunt work to do. Go through the files again and see if you can find something that we missed. The classic thing in every procedural, and this is a kind of version of a police procedural on a grand geopolitical scale. The woman who has to go through the files again finds the file that actually turns out to have on it the details of the man they think that they're looking for. And this file has been there from the beginning, and it has been missed, repeatedly missed. And the name that's given to this section of the film is human error. It was human error that meant that the information that was needed was there in plain sight, but it was hidden because it was hidden behind a wave, a tsunami of other files. When they discuss why did we not see this, it's because they were drowning in information. So there is a danger with the information that you get from your high-level detainees under conditions of torture is that it's flashy. It makes a splash, partly because the conditions under which it's extracted are so horrific that everybody pays attention. But it's not necessarily reliable, and it's not necessarily the case that the information you want is the information that announces itself with a fanfare. We broke him, and finally he spoke. The information that they wanted and they needed was buried. And so if the question is, what is this film suggesting is needed in order for an operation like this to succeed? Is it saying that what you need are tougher, harder torturers? Or is it saying that you need a better filing system? I think it's saying that you need a better filing system. The third stage, and I think this is the best part of the film, it's completely gripping, is called, in the titles that were given to break up the movie, tradecraft. Sometimes called spycraft, kind of John le Carré word, meaning the business of successfully working out how to unravel what the other side are doing. The secrets of the game, the inside secrets of the game, has nothing to do with torture or violence or even force. It's all about smarts. It's all about working out how to outmaneuver the other side. But what's so fascinating about this section is the implication that what leads the people searching for the courier to the courier, so they can identify the man and his car. And once they've identified his car, which is a white SUV, they can track it to the place where they see it going inside a gate, and that turns out to be where Bin Laden is. So the key thing they need is visuals on the guy. But they have very little information. Even when they think they know who it is that they're looking for, they have very, very little information to go on in order to know how to find him. They know quite a lot about his family. He belongs to a family, most of whom are thought to be involved in Al-Qaeda activities. There's quite a lot of confusion about which member of the family he is. There are a lot of brothers. At one point, they think he's dead. And then Maya, Jessica Chastain, concludes that it's one of the brothers who's dead because they've had information from a detainee, not under torture. Someone just voluntarily said, that guy you're looking for, he's dead. Genuine information, just mistaken identity, more human error. But when they think they know which one it is that they're looking for, they have to find him, and they've got almost nothing to go on. Thanks to another traditional technique of this kind of tradecraft, bribery, they offer a Kuwaiti official a Lamborghini. And in return, he gives them the phone number of the mother of this family, the matriarch, with all of the sons and all of the cousins. But she seems to be a point of contact for them because she's their mother and they're good boys. But she receives lots and lots of phone calls. And they have to work out which of these phone calls, because no one on these phone calls with the old mum is talking about Osama bin Laden or where they're going to target next. These are all banal conversations. They have to work out which of these banal conversations is from their guy. And the way they conclude which one it is not because of their tradecraft, but because of his tradecraft. So the word comes up in the context not of what the Americans do, the CIA does, but what the Al-Qaeda people do. He's too clever for his own good because he's trying to hide his identity. In a small group of people making phone calls to a woman in Kuwait City, it's the person who is trying not to be seen who is the one they're looking for. So it's the person who calls from different locations and uses different phones and never speaks for very long. And as one of them says, well, maybe it's just because he doesn't like his mother. He's not talking to her for as long as the others. But Jessica Chastain, Maya, says, no, it's because he's trying to cover his tracks. And by trying to cover his tracks, he's revealed himself. It's that kind of spy work. And then they do it again, because then they identify where he is, a built-up urban environment in Pakistan in which there are thousands of people on mobile phones, and they've got to find him on his phone. And by this point, they have some idea of which one his phone is, but he's never on it for long enough for them to track him. And they send CIA agents into the field to walk through marketplaces and internet cafes where there are people everywhere, men everywhere, who might or might not look like this guy, on their phones. They have no way of knowing which one is him. It is like looking for a needle in a haystack, and it's pretty compellingly filmed. It looks nightmarishly difficult. There is noise and bustle, and there are people everywhere, and there are phones everywhere. And it's almost impossible to move around. And somehow in this thing, you've got to find this guy, but they have one advantage. He doesn't want to be found. He's the needle in the haystack who's trying to hide himself in the haystack, which means unlike all the other needles, he keeps moving. There's one needle in this haystack, which once they hear the call, they become aware that he is in a vehicle driving around in circles. No one else is doing that because no one else is trying not to be tracked. And by trying not to be tracked, he lets them track him. And when they've tracked him, and when they've identified the car, they follow the car to the compound. And the compound looks pretty suspicious. It's got very high walls. It's not in the middle of nowhere. It's suspiciously, depending on your point of view, close to what's described as Pakistan's West Point, the main military academy in Pakistan. But it's also remote. It's cut off. No one really seems to go in or come out apart from the courier in his white SUV, the man who's making the phone calls. But he might live there. He might be working for someone else at this point. On none of these phone calls is he talking about Al-Qaeda operations. They need to see inside the compound. The CIA, who are now referring all of this back higher up the chain of command, including at one point someone says, I think they're taking this to the president. And the president by this point is Barack Obama, who, among other things we see in this film, say, we can no longer use torture. That's not who we are. We are not going to use those techniques. They need to know whether bin Laden is in there or not. And they can't know. They try everything. They can't see in. They can't put a secret camera in there. They try to send in a doctor because they know that there are children living in the compound. So they send in a man who says he's there to vaccinate the children. And as soon as someone inside twigs what's going on, he's sent away again. They think about drones. They think about sending someone to sort of scour the sewers so that they can get the fecal matter and try and test it against what they know of bin Laden's DNA until they realize they wouldn't know and it would be too diluted. They do all the stuff that is kind of parody CIA tradecraft, like the exploding cigars they tried to use to kill Fidel Castro. It's the kind of joke stuff, but it's no joke here because they know that none of it works. And in the end, all they have is instinct. There are various reasons to think that bin Laden is in the compound, but it could be someone else. As someone says, it could be a drug dealer. Pakistan has plenty of people in the heroin trade, and this is the kind of place that such a person might live and might have contact with this courier guy who might be working for other people. It could be an Al-Qaeda person, but not bin Laden, just as likely. And though they want to kill the Al-Qaeda people, this has now become the hunt for bin Laden. If that were true, that would be a form of intelligence failure. They just don't know. And so the fourth part of the equation, the fourth necessary but not sufficient condition, is political judgment. Information, human error, the correction of human error, tradecraft, and then finally, it's just a question of judgment. And there is a celebrated scene in this film in which the then head of the CIA, Leon Panetta, played by James Gandolfini, Tony Soprano, gathers the senior people involved in this operation around a table. And he says, I've got to take this to the president, basically. And they're going to want to know how sure we are that it's bin Laden in there. If they're going to authorize an operation, send troops, send soldiers, try and kill him and risk losing their lives in the process. They want to be sure. So he says, how sure are we? I want to know how certain we are. And everybody looks at their shoes and looks at their files as people do when the boss says, I want someone to put his or her ass on the line here. And then someone plucks up the courage to say, I'm not sure. This really is a question of judgment. And he says, we're all seeing this through past filters. Many of us were in the room when we told a previous president that we were sure that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and he didn't. So we are all scarred by that experience. And this guy says, so I think it could well be Bin Laden, but I'm not putting it above 60%. And then someone else says, I agree, 60. And then someone else says, no, I think it's more like 80%. I think there are really good reasons to think it's Bin Laden. And someone else says, I think it's a soft 60. And James Gandolfini, Leon Panetta, loses his temper. And he says, you guys, do you agree on anything? Can I ever get a straight answer from any of you? And then Maya, who is in the room as the only woman and is not being listened to by anyone else. No one takes her particularly seriously. She's there because she has a stake in this operation. She's put in the hours. But she is the most junior person in the room. And she says 100%. And they turn and look at her. And then she said, okay, 95%, but only because I know you guys can't handle certainty. And so if I say 100%, you're going to think I'm crazy. So 95%, she says, but actually what I mean by that is 100%. And it's not clear how they respond to this. They look pretty uncomfortable, as they tend to do when Maya says what she thinks. But she's the only one who's willing to make it an all or nothing equation. I don't think that, we are meant to believe, was the decisive factor. In the end, the historical record suggests, from the people who were in the other room, the room with Obama, when this decision was made, that no one told him it was 100%. And I don't think anyone even told him there was someone in the CIA who thought it was 100%. He made the judgment on the 60%, 80% calls. And notoriously, his vice president, Joe Biden, who was also in the room, said, don't do it. It's too risky. It's not worth it. Biden was pretty adamant the other way. Obama ultimately made the call. And it turned out that the call was the right one. All of these things had to go together to make this possible. Most of the key action does not take place in black ops sites. Most of the key action takes place in offices. And in all of those office-based decisions, you can see on the faces of the people a range of different considerations as they try to work out what they can risk, what's really at stake, what they can afford to do. Some of these happen in the White House. So we are never taken in this film inside the Oval Office. No one in this film plays Obama or Biden or Hillary Clinton. The closest that we get to the heart of power is a man playing Obama's national security advisor, who is the last barrier between the people in the CIA who think they might have found bin Laden and the man who will ultimately make the Schmittian decision, the president, Obama himself. And as they try to get past that final barrier, there is a conversation between the Mark Strong character, the man who had originally shouted at his team, you're not doing a good enough job on your KPIs, kill, 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 and the national security advisor, in which he says, what is the barrier here? What is the block here? It's politics, isn't it? It's politics that's getting in the way of the decision. And Obama's guy says, it's not politics. You don't understand politics. You're in the CIA. If this was politics, we would be calculating this on the basis of what it would do to our electoral prospects. That would be the thinking inside the Oval Office. This would be politics in that sense. We would do this nearer an election or at a different point in the election cycle, for better or for worse. We are not thinking about it in political terms. We are thinking about this purely on the basis of whether or not we think he's there. So this is actually pure judgment. He doesn't even call it political judgment. He just says this is judgment, this is instinct, this is people trying to work stuff out. You are wrong if you are accusing us of politics. Now, again, in Schmittian terms, that conversation doesn't make sense. So Schmitt would say, what the National Security Advisor calls politics is not politics. That's just playing around with election cycles. That's just thinking about what would advantage the party or the administration or even the individuals themselves in their chances of keeping their jobs. Schmitt didn't think that was politics. He thought the thing that the National Security Advisor says is not politics, pure judgment, is politics. But even then, these two things are happening simultaneously. No one, I think, believes that there is no consideration of what they're calling in this film politics. And at the same time, clearly it is true that there is something in what we call politics that transcends that is closer to this pure realm of judgment. And it is a judgment about the Schmidt question, which is how far are we willing to go and what risks are we willing to run to take on and ultimately to kill our enemies. And all the way through the film to that point, and to the point where it is taken to the president and we don't see that final conversation, the film plays with these different understandings of what goes into the biggest political decisions and the different kinds of people who play a part. The bureaucrats, the actual killers who are also actual bureaucrats, the underlings, the bosses, the people who are worried about promotion, the people who are jealous of other people, the people who are worried about who's going to get the credit, the people who are worried about who's going to be held carrying the can when the music stops, to mix those two metaphors, just as David Brent would do, just as the CIA agent would do. All of this, I think, is brilliantly woven together, not in any neat way. There are no easy lessons here. I don't think this film gives you any idea about where the real heart of this story is, because it's not in one place. It's not in the black ops sites, and it's not in the conference rooms, and it's not in the Oval Office. It's kind of in all of them. And that is a 2-hour movie, I think a brilliant 2-hour movie, but there's still 45 minutes to go. And I feel I need to say this for people who haven't seen this film. The film then takes a turn, and it takes a turn away from being that kind of movie, basically to being a version of Top Gun, in the sense that I would identify the specific point, the scene where the shift happens, which is when it's clear that the operation is going to happen. And Maya has been sent out to the base in Afghanistan from which the operation is going to be launched into Pakistan, the US military base. And she's there with the men, the special forces, big, beefy men with guns and amazing equipment. There's a bit of equipment porn that happens in the last part of the film, just as there is in Top Gun. The night vision goggles they're kind of cool, I guess, if you like that kind of thing. She's there with them. But by this point, the question of motivation has shifted from these complex issues about hierarchy and power and the different ways in which human beings are multiply motivated, even on the biggest questions, to something much simpler, more old-fashioned, which is that they say to her, these special forces guys with their funky equipment and their helicopters that don't make any noise and their guns that can do terrible things to you, they say to her, what is the intelligence that we're basing this on? What are we doing this for? Because we've done this before. We've been sent after Bin Laden before, and some of our guys died and he didn't die. And she says, because I think it's true. And she tries to give them the reasons, and they're doubtful. And then she says, and anyway, you're going to do this. She says, I wanted to just drop a bomb on the compound, but the higher-ups decided that that was not the way to go, and so they're sending you to do it. And so she says to them, so you are going to go and kill him for me. She says this to them when she meets them back in the United States. By the time we see them again, just before the operation is launched, something has shifted in this film. And we're meant to believe they are doing it for her. And this is some older kind of story in which muscly warrior men go out and do killing for a beautiful woman. And the scene after which I think the film is no longer as good as it was, it's just before the operation is launched, and we see Jessica Chastain with aviator shades, looking backlit and glamorous. And we see the men who are going to kill Bin Laden throwing around a football and gambling and shooting the shit with each other. And there's just a look between them where she looks at them and they look at her, and it's kind of, we all know what's going on here. This is something to do with men and women. And suddenly we're in the world of Top Gun. And everything that happens after that has nothing to do with what's come before that. It's pretty exciting. Top Gun's a pretty good film. The last 45 minutes of Zero Dark 30, the op itself, with the night goggles and all the rest of it, it's compelling. It's scary. One of the choppers goes down, and we know how the story ends. So there's not that kind of suspense, but you do wonder how they're all going to get out alive. They're near the Pakistan military base. At one point, Pakistan helicopters are coming, and so they have 4 minutes to get out and 3 minutes to get out. When they go into the compound, it's grim. There are children whom they try not to kill. There are women whom they try not to kill, but end up killing some of them anyway. And they finally get their guy. They come back, they whoop, they holler, they high five. Maya gets to identify the body. She sheds a tear. It's still Top Gun. There is another way this film might have ended. It doesn't seem to be what Kathryn Bigelow and her scriptwriter were interested in. The other film, I guess this becomes is Point Break. It becomes that other kind of movie that she makes and makes well. But this film could have carried on with the story that it follows for the first 2 hours. So, I think, compellingly, creepily, but compellingly, which is to go that final step and to take it into the Oval Office, to take it into the Situation Room, where the people who did make the final existential Schmittian decision, and also, in part, put aspects of their careers on the line. When Obama decided to go ahead with this raid, he will have had in the back of his mind what happened when Jimmy Carter made a similar decision to try and rescue the hostages in Iran. And when that operation went wrong, what it cost Carter. Maybe not the presidency, maybe the presidency. And when Biden told Obama, don't do this, he was thinking in the terms in which this film uses the word politically. It's too risky. It's too risky because we've got other stuff we want to do with the power that we have. But in the end, Obama made the call. It was a brave call, and it was the right call. But there are still things to be said about how you get from those conversations between the CIA and the National Security Advisor and the final step. And there is a celebrated image of the room, the Situation Room, and the moment when the raid is underway and the people who were involved in that final decision, that final step. The name of the photo, it's come to be known as the Situation Room. That's what it's called. And it's a shot of a group of people. There are about 15 of them sitting around looking, we don't see it, but looking at a screen in which they are clearly seeing something that is gripping them. And what they were watching was the footage being relayed back of the raid itself. Some people say that this was a photograph taken at the moment when they discovered that one of the helicopters had gone down. Other people say it's a photograph of the moment when they realized that Bin Laden had been killed. The room is a boring conference room. If that's what the Situation Room looks like, they could do with some pictures on the walls. It looks airless. The people in there, some of them are wearing ties. Most of them are wearing shirts, but no ties. They are almost all middle-aged white men. They look like politicians or bureaucrats or business people. You wouldn't know if you just saw their faces and their attire who they were. They are actually the Secretary of Defense, the Director of National Intelligence, the National Security Advisor to the President, the Vice President, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Commanding General of Joint Special Operations, the Deputy National Security Advisor. They are all white, except for one person. So there's one person who looks a little bit like an outsider. He looks young, and he's wearing some kind of bomber jacket, it looks like. He's dressed differently from the rest, and he's sitting to the side. He's definitely not at the center of this. That's the president, Obama, the only non-white face in the room. And then there are two women in the room among all the men. One is right at the back, and the men are blocking her view because she's shorter than they are. So she can't really see the screen. And we see her in this photograph just peering around the corner of, happens to be Tony Blinken, who became Biden's Secretary of State. And she, it turns out, is a woman called Audrey Thomason. She was the director for counterterrorism for the National Security Council. Very little is known about her, but she looks like she's an afterthought. She looks like the Jessica Chastain. Actually, in this photograph, she looks a lot like the Jennifer Ailey character in Zero Dark 30, and she's playing that role in the film. The women in the room are always on the side, on the edge, towards the back, being overlooked and seeing things that other people don't see. And then the other woman in the room is the only one with a hand over her mouth. Everyone else is looking concerned, curious, nervous. One person in the room looks horrified, and that's Hillary Clinton. So what makes this photograph so famous is the expression on Hillary Clinton's face. It is more human than anyone else's expression. It's the one that we would expect, those of us who think that we're nothing like these people, if we stumbled into this room and found ourselves watching the footage or seeing relayed the information about what was going on in this raid in real time, we would think that's how we would react. We would put our hand over our mouths and we would be horrified. And she looks horrified, but she also looks human. Obama looks cool, but also he looks a little bit like he's an outsider in this world. And that may be one of the things that helped him to make the decision. Biden looks like an insider. That may be one of the reasons why he got the call wrong. The other woman in the room looks like she has been excluded. But the only person in the room who looks like she has not a bureaucratic reaction, but a human reaction is Hillary Clinton. I would like Zero Dark 30 to have taken the story forward to the Situation Room photograph. That seems to me like the culmination of the story, not the raid on the compound in Abbottabad. But it doesn't. That will have to be another film. I will have to wait, as I am waiting, eagerly, for the Hillary Clinton biopic. We have a new bonus episode out to accompany this series on PPF Plus. So if you would like to hear it, you do need to subscribe to PPF Plus. That just involves following the link in the show description or going to our website, ppfideas.com. It's very simple. You get all of our bonus episodes and you get ad-free listening. This latest one is particularly, I think, for people who maybe feel that this series in its more recent episodes has focused on some pretty heavy stuff. There's maybe been a bit too much violence. The film I'm talking about in our latest bonus is my favorite political film, the one that I watch over and over again for comfort, the one that always makes me laugh. It's Armando Iannucci's In the Loop. There is almost no violence in it. It is true that a very angry Glaswegian man stamps on a fax machine, and also it stars James Gandolfini, as does Zero Dark 30, playing an American general. The scariest thing he does is he scrunches up a magazine. It's a brilliant film. It was a lot of fun talking about it. I hope you might enjoy listening to it as a little bit of light relief. Next time, the final episode in this series is a very different kind of film again. It connects to our earlier bonuses that we put out before Christmas again, which are available now on PPF Plus, 2 episodes about Claude Lanzmann's epic documentary on the Holocaust, Shoah. And next time, I'm going to be talking about another film, a very different film, also about Auschwitz, The Zone of Interest. Do join us for that. This has been Past, Present, Future, brought to you in partnership with the London Review of Books. Past, Present, Future is part of the Airwave podcast network.